I'm strong like a bone, magic radio. Don't leave me alone, my radio.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Ledge Theatre. On today's episode is someone who's more famous for his voice than his actual face.
Mills, Heskey. Owen has made a good run, looking to peel away from Lucio. He's made a mistake. It's Michael Owen! It's 1-0 England! Goals are back on the menu for England's hungriest goal scorer. But goals don't come any more special than against Brazil.
Yes, that's right, it's ITV's chief commentator, Clive Tildesley. Now, he came in to spend an afternoon with students and faculty in Harrington Building to do a question and answer session. This is that very session.
Yes, sir.
The England team you mentioned as well. Are their fortunes a byproduct of the pressure put on them by the media, or are they just not good enough?
Well, I do think that, and sure, Charles and I worked together in the late 19th century in local radio stations in Liverpool. And there was a time when Charles worked for the newspaper to begin with when I first met him. And we used to travel on the Everton and Liverpool team buses. We used to actually travel with them to away games, stay in the same hotel. Admittedly, we were the same age as the players then. We actually used to go out drinking with them and everything when players did drink. And there was a very, very close relationship formed between particularly the local journalists and the local journalists who worked on the national newspapers and the players. That relationship's gone. There's a huge distance developed between football and its media, which is a problem because the whole job, as we've identified, of a sports journalist is to convey to the public who are desperate for any information about football teams and sports teams of any kind, exactly what's going on within the camp. We can't get into the camps now. There are press officers and agents who prevent you from getting close to the people that you want to get to. So consequently, particularly the players at the top of the game, the England players, you just ain't going to see them in Sainsbury's anymore. Yeah? There was a time, probably 20, 30 years ago, where you might just bump into a footballer doing a little bit of shopping. You ain't going to see that now. You know, partly because of money, but partly because of this distance that's grown between celebrity and public in all spheres of entertainment, I think. And I think that distance has brought with it a strange kind of pressure. I think that football fans now are less sympathetic, less patient, less understanding of the travails of footballers because they are being paid. It doesn't actually make a great deal of difference. When you get a certain amount of money, the extra money that you get is barely a motivation, I wouldn't have thought. But I think we now are more inclined to crucify our gods more quickly than we used to do. And so, I'm not excusing them, but there is clearly a different pressure on these players when they play for England. They perform in a different way than they do for their clubs at the very highest level of the club game in Champions League. Now, I'm not saying that's the only factor, surrounded by better players, foreign players, more of that sort of identity with the club and so on. Maybe the actual manager whispering in their ear, don't go on international duty, I need you to be fit to play at Chelsea on Sunday. So there are other factors too, but I do think that part of the problem of playing for England now, and I think the same can be true of rugby union and cricket, is that we as a media have now lost touch with the people who are entertaining. It is a labour-intensive industry. These are the people that make it happen, the entertainers, the performers. And I think we're less able... We feel as if we know Wayne Rooney, because we know his wife, we know the name of his children, we see snaps of him on holiday, we've seen his dad stripped down to the waist in the waves. We feel as if we know him sufficiently to make a judgment about what kind of a person he is.
After his lecture, we managed to get a much more personal interview with Clive. Here's Tom Dunn.
How important do you think it is for students to realise, what it takes to become a successful journalist instead of just watching the television every day or reading the paper every day?
I mean, the point that I've tried to put across today is that I would love to have done a sports journalism degree instead of industrial economics and politics,
which I was forced to do because I couldn't get onto one of the 3 media courses that there were in the country back in the dark ages, one of which was in Preston, oddly enough. So that you're already ahead of the game, ahead of my game, you know, just studying what I really wanted to study at university. Now, on the flip side of that, competition for places within the industry has probably never been fiercer. So, as in any interview process, you've got to somehow stand apart from your competitors, the other people who are interviewing for the job. Now, ability and talent, and in broadcast, for instance, appearance can sometimes be a factor, but actual appetite for the job. An appetite is consuming media already as if you're in the industry. Watching football commentaries, listening to news bulletins with an analytical and inquiring mind, being restless, being dissatisfied by what you're hearing, wanting to make some kind of impact on the industry if you get your opportunity to work. So, it's very important. You've not just chosen some bland subject to continue your education. You've made a statement already by signing up for these courses that this is the industry that you want to work in. You're not going to be a pharmacist if you're with a sports journalism degree. And so, I think it's important that you start to behave like a sports journalist from the moment that you walk through the door of this establishment.
Absolutely. How important do you think it is to get involved with work experience projects such as the student media?
You just take every opportunity you can to add to your experience. There is absolutely no substitute for doing the job. And part of the reason for that is just breaking through your natural personal inhibitions, not yours, anybody's. I never had a show reel to play to anybody when I was trying to get into the industry. I mean, there are a million different ways now that you can record yourself in such a way that you could play it to somebody if you wanted to be a broadcaster. But the biggest critic of that show reel will be, certainly should be, yourself, because the first time you hear yourself, you'll want to jump off a high building, and maybe the first time you write something and then read it again 2 days later, you may want to get an even higher building, but you've got to break through that. You've got to get something down on paper, something down on tape, something down on film. You've got to go through that process. I watch back most of my commentaries, not because I'm vain, but because I'm trying to get a bit better. I'm trying to recognise mistakes that I've made, trying to hear things that sometimes I'll record a commentary and then watch it from the 23rd minute to see how it sounds to somebody who's missed the first 22 minutes of the game. Just going through those little processes of trying to put yourself in the viewer's seat, and listening to good feedback. I mean, I don't particularly like Twitter. If you look at my app mentions after a game, I'm happy to say that probably 80% of them will be accusing me of being biased or blind or something like that. And sometimes they may well, certainly in terms of the blind thing, they may well be right. But occasionally, in amongst all of the ire, there'll be somebody, maybe 2 or 3 people who've spotted something which has annoyed them, something I've done. I've got a little thing where people didn't like analogies I made with boxing. I might have sort of said, that if a team's been on top, had a lot of possession, it's like they're winning it on points, but there's always a danger they're going to take a knockout. Somehow that might have annoyed 3 or 4 people. You've got to listen to things like that. But in order to listen to it, you've got to do it. So do some, try some, see if you're any good.
Wow, what a brilliant insight into football commentary for one of the absolute legends of the game. On behalf of PSTV and the whole of UCLan, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Clive for coming along. This has been the Lectured Theatre. Good night.
My radio, I'm strong like a bomb, magic radio. Don't leave